Neighbor cut down my $80,000 century-old tree. Lawyer turned it into foreclosure. You heard that right. My neighbor literally took a chainsaw to a tree that had been standing since the 1890s, a tree that was appraised at $80,000, and thought he could just walk away from it. Spoiler alert, he couldn't. What started as an act of petty neighborhood revenge turned into the most satisfying legal destruction I've ever witnessed. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where this nightmare began. My name's irrelevant for this story, but what matters is this. I'm a 34-year-old software engineer working remotely for a tech company in Silicon Valley. I bought my house in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Oregon 5 years ago. It's a beautiful craftsman-style home built in 1912, sitting on half an acre of land. The crown jewel of my property, a massive English oak tree that was planted in 1892 by the original homeowner. This wasn't just any tree. It was a neighborhood landmark. Kids grew up playing around it. People took wedding photos under its canopy. The city's historical society had it registered as a heritage tree, which meant it was protected by local ordinances. I had it professionally appraised 2 years ago for insurance purposes, and the arborist valued it at $80,000 based on its age, size, species, and historical significance. The thing was absolutely magnificent. Over 130 years old, standing about 80 feet tall with a canopy that provided shade for half my backyard. I love that tree. It was one of the main reasons I bought the house. Now, let me introduce you to the antagonist of this story, my neighbor, Brad. Brad moved in next door about 18 months ago with his wife, Karen. Yes, really, and yes, she lived up to the name. Brad was one of those guys who thought he was hot shit because he drove a leased BMW and wore expensive watches he probably couldn't afford. He was a real estate agent, the kind who acted like he was some property mogul when in reality, he was barely scraping by on commission checks. From day one, Brad had a problem with my tree. He complained that the leaves fell into his yard every autumn. He whined that the roots were probably damaging his driveway. They weren't. I had it surveyed. He even had the audacity to suggest I should trim it back because it was blocking his view of the sunset. Never mind that the tree was there 130 years before he showed up. I was always polite but firm. Brad, it's a protected heritage tree. I literally can't cut it down even if I wanted to. And I don't want to. He would huff and puff. For the first year, that was the extent of it. Just annoying comments and passive-aggressive remarks at neighborhood barbecues. Then things escalated. It was a Saturday morning in late April. I woke up around 8 a.m. to the sound of a chainsaw screaming outside my window. At first, I thought maybe the city was doing some tree maintenance on the street. But as the fog of sleep cleared, I realized the sound was coming from my backyard. I threw on some clothes and ran outside. And I will never forget the sight that greeted me. Brad was standing in MY yard, on MY property, with a massive chainsaw in his hands, cutting into the trunk of my English oak. He'd already made a wedge cut about a foot deep into the base, but chips were flying everywhere. His wife Karen was standing nearby with her phone out, filming him and laughing like they were pulling off some kind of prank. I was shaking with rage. The audacity was unreal. Brad, what the hell are you doing? I screamed, running toward him. He turned off the chainsaw and had the nerve to smile at me. Oh, hey there, neighbor. Just taking care of this tree problem once and for all. You kept refusing to deal with it, so I figured I'd handle it myself. You can thank me later. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Thank you? Thank you? You're cutting down a heritage tree. This is illegal. This is MY property. Karen chimed in, still holding her phone up. Oh, relax. It's just a tree. Brad's doing you a favor. Now you won't have to deal with all those messy leaves anymore. Plus, it'll increase both our property values. I was absolutely stunned. These people were actually delusional. Stop cutting right now, or I'm calling the police. Brad laughed. Go ahead. By the time they get here, this thing will be on the ground. Maybe next time you'll be a better neighbor and actually listen when people have legitimate concerns. That was it. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911 while simultaneously stepping between Brad and the tree. I told the dispatcher that my neighbor was on my property destroying a protected heritage tree and that I felt threatened. The operator said officers were on their way. Brad tried to push past me to get back to the tree, but I stood my ground. Touch me and it's assault, Brad. I've got Ring cameras recording everything. That made him pause. Good. He was stupid, but not stupid enough to assault someone on camera. The police arrived within 10 minutes. 2 officers, 1 male and 1 female, walked into my backyard and immediately assessed the situation. The male officer looked at the massive cut in the tree trunk and then at Brad, who was still holding the chainsaw. Sir, is this your property? The officer asked Brad. Well, no, but... So you're admitting to trespassing and destroying property that doesn't belong to you? Brad's confidence started to crack. It's just a tree. This guy's being unreasonable about it. The thing's a nuisance to the whole neighborhood. The female officer walked over to examine the tree. Sir, this appears to be a heritage tree. There's a historical marker plate right here on the fence. She pointed to the small bronze plaque I'd had installed. Are you aware that destroying a protected heritage tree is a criminal offense in this county? Karen finally stopped filming. Her face went pale. The officers took statements from all of us. I showed them the property property survey, the heritage tree registration, and my Ring camera footage of Brad trespassing and cutting the tree. Brad tried to argue that he thought it was on the property line and that he had a right to protect his property from root damage, but the officers weren't buying it. They issued Brad a citation for criminal mischief and trespassing. They also informed him that I had the right to pursue civil damages. Brad's face was red with anger as the officers left, but he didn't say another word to me. He just grabbed his chainsaw and stormed back into his house with Karen trailing behind. I stood there looking at my beautiful tree, now with a massive gash in its trunk, and felt sick to my stomach. I immediately called an emergency tree service to come assess the damage. The arborist arrived that afternoon and gave me devastating news. The cut was so deep and so close to the base that the tree's structural integrity was compromised. There was a high risk it would fall, especially during the next windstorm. His recommendation was to have it professionally removed before it became a hazard. I was heartbroken. A 130-year-old tree gone because of one entitled idiot with a chainsaw. But I wasn't just going to let this go. No chance in hell. That same day, I contacted a lawyer who specialized in property law and tree disputes. Yes, that's a real specialization. And yes, I learned very quickly that tree law is absolutely insane. My attorney's name was Patricia, and she was a bulldog. Within an hour of our consultation, she was already salivating at the case. This is one of the clearest cut cases I've seen in years, Patricia said, grinning like a shark. Pun intended. Your neighbor destroyed a protected heritage tree on your property. We have video evidence, police reports, and professional assessments. We're going to bury him. She explained the legal framework. In Oregon, when someone unlawfully damages or destroys a tree, it can be liable for treble damages, meaning 3 times the appraised value of the tree. My tree was appraised at $80,000. That meant Brad was potentially on the hook for $240,000, plus legal fees, plus the cost of removal, plus potential punitive damages for the heritage tree protection violation. I authorized Patricia to move forward immediately. She filed a civil lawsuit against Brad within 72 hours, seeking $240,000 in treble damages, $15,000 for emergency removal costs, $30,000 for loss of property value, and legal fees. The total claim was around $300,000. When the sheriff served Brad with the lawsuit papers, I was watching from my window. His reaction was priceless. He read the documents, and I literally saw the color drain from his face. He stood there on his porch for a full 5 minutes, just staring at the papers. Karen came out, read over his shoulder, and I could hear her screaming from inside my house. That evening, Brad came over and knocked on my door. I answered with my phone recording. Hey man, look, I think we got off on the wrong foot here, Brad said, trying to sound friendly. This lawsuit thing is crazy. It's just a tree. Can't we work this out neighbor to neighbor? You had the chance to be neighborly before you trespassed on my property and destroyed an irreplaceable 130-year-old heritage tree, I said calmly. Now it's in the hands of my lawyer. Dude, $300,000? Are you insane? I don't have that kind of money. Then you probably shouldn't have cut down an $80,000 tree, I replied, especially one that was legally protected. Brad's friendly demeanor vanished. You're being a vindictive asshole about this. It's extortion. No, Brad, it's the law. You committed a crime. Now you're facing the consequences. Have your lawyer contact my lawyer. We're done here. I closed the door in his face. Over the next few days, I had the tree professionally removed. It took a crew of 6 people 2 full days to safely bring it down and grind out the stump. Every time I looked at the empty space where that magnificent tree used to stand, I felt a fresh wave of anger. That tree had stood through 2 world wars, depression, countless storms and seasons, only to be killed by an entitled real estate agent with an ego problem. But the legal process was just beginning. Update 1. About 3 weeks after filing the lawsuit, Patricia called me with an update. We were in the discovery phase, which meant both sides were exchanging documents and information. And boy, did we discover some interesting things about Brad. Your neighbor is in serious financial trouble, Patricia told me. We subpoenaed his bank records and property records as part of the discovery. He's underwater on his mortgage. He owes more on the house than it's worth. He's got over $60,000 in credit card debt, a car lease he can't afford, and his real estate commission income has been declining for the past 2 years. He's basically house poor and drowning in debt. So he can't pay the judgment, I said. Oh, it gets better, Patricia continued. His homeowner's insurance is denying his claim. They're saying the damage he caused was intentional and malicious, which isn't covered. So he's personally on the hook for the full amount. And here's the kicker. His wife Karen apparently didn't know how bad their finances were. She just filed for separation last week. I couldn't believe it. Are you serious? Dead serious. I have the separation filing right here. Apparently, when she found out about the lawsuit and the real state of their finances, she lost it. They're separating, and she's moving back to her parents' house in California. This was better than I could have imagined. Brad's life was falling apart, and it was entirely his own fault. A few days later, Brad's lawyer reached out to Patricia with a settlement offer, $15,000, paid out over 3 years, and a written apology. I almost laughed when Patricia told me, $15,000 and we were asking for $300? Not a chance. Counteroffer. Full amount plus legal fees, or we go to trial, and I'll also pursue criminal charges for the heritage tree violation, I told Patricia. Brad's lawyer came back with $30,000. Still insulting. We rejected it. Then $50,000. Rejected. They were panicking, trying to find any way out of this that wouldn't completely destroy Brad financially. financially, but I wasn't interested in negotiating. He'd had plenty of chances to be reasonable before he cut down my tree, after he cut it down, even after I filed the lawsuit. He'd been an arrogant jerk at every turn. Now he was going to face the full consequences. Meanwhile, the neighborhood was buzzing with gossip. People had seen the tree come down, seen the police at Brad's house, and word spreads fast in suburbs. Several neighbors reached out to me expressing their sympathy and sharing their own Brad horror stories. Apparently, he'd been a nightmare neighbor to multiple people, parking his BMW across driveways, letting his dog poop in people's yards without cleaning it up, playing loud music late at night, and constantly bragging about real estate deals that probably never happened. One neighbor, an elderly woman named Dorothy who lived 2 houses down, told me that Brad had tried to pressure her into selling her house so he could flip it for profit. When she refused, he started a rumor that her property was bringing down neighborhood values. Dorothy was in her 80s and had lived there for 40 years. Brad's cruelty knew no bounds. I was more convinced than ever that I was doing the right thing by pursuing this lawsuit to the fullest extent. Update 2. 4 months after filing the lawsuit, we finally got a trial date. Brad's lawyer tried multiple times to get the case dismissed or moved to arbitration, but the judge denied every motion. The evidence was too strong. Video footage, police reports, arborist testimony, heritage tree protection laws. It was an airtight case. The day of the trial arrived in late August. I wore my best suit and met Patricia at the courthouse. Brad showed up looking haggard and defeated. He'd lost weight, had dark circles under his eyes, and his expensive watch was noticeably absent. Karen wasn't with him. The separation had apparently become a full divorce filing. The trial lasted 2 days. Our side presented video evidence from my Ring cameras showing Brad trespassing and cutting the tree, police reports and citations, testimony from the arborist who'd appraised the tree at $80,000, testimony from the city's historical preservation officer about the heritage tree status, property surveys showing the tree was 100% on my land, photos of the tree before and after, and of the empty space where it once stood, expert testimony about treble damages in Oregon tree law. Brad's defense was pathetic. His lawyer tried to argue that Brad believed the tree was a danger to his property, contradicted by the fact that no arborist had ever assessed it as dangerous, and that he had acted in good faith, completely contradicted by the video evidence of him laughing about it and ignoring my demands to stop. The most damning moment came when Patricia cross-examined Brad. She asked him directly, "Mr. Brad, did you have permission from the property owner to cut down this tree?" "No, but..." "Did you consult with an arborist before cutting it?" "No." "Did you check with the city about whether the tree was protected?" "No, I didn't think." "Did you stop cutting when the property owner explicitly told you to stop?" "I was almost done at that point." "So that's a no." "Did you, at any point, consider that destroying your neighbor's property might have legal consequences?" Brad didn't answer. He just sat there looking miserable. The judge deliberated for less than 3 hours. When we reconvened, his verdict was swift and brutal. "I find in favor of the plaintiff," Judge Harrison said, looking at Brad with obvious disdain. "The defendant willfully and maliciously destroyed a heritage tree valued at $80,000. Under Oregon law, I am awarding treble damages in the amount of $240,000 plus $15,000 for removal costs, $30,000 for diminished property value, and $45,000 in legal fees. Total judgment, $330,000. Brad's face went white. His lawyer actually put his head in his hands. But the judge wasn't done. "Furthermore, I am referring this case to the District Attorney's Office for criminal prosecution under the Heritage Tree Protection Act, which carries potential fines and jail time. Mr. Brad, your actions were not those of a reasonable person with a legitimate property concern. They were those of an entitled, arrogant individual who believed he was above the law. You will now face the full consequences of that belief." The gavel came down. It was over. I had won completely. Outside the courtroom, Patricia was ecstatic. "That was beautiful. I've never seen a judge so clearly disgusted with a defendant. $330,000 plus potential criminal charges. He's finished." I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness. I'd won, but my tree was still gone. No amount of money would bring it back. Still, justice had been served, and Brad was going to pay dearly for what he'd done. Update 3. The aftermath of the trial was swift and merciless. Brad had 30 days to either pay the judgment or work out a payment plan. Given his financial situation, neither was realistic. Patricia immediately filed a lien against his house, which meant he couldn't sell it or refinance it without paying off the judgment first. Brad tried. He really did. He listed the house for sale at a price that would have barely covered his underwater mortgage, much less the additional $330,000 judgment lien. The house sat on the market for 2 months with 0 offers. No one wanted to buy a house with that kind of legal baggage attached. Meanwhile, the criminal case moved forward. The district attorney charged Brad with willful destruction of a heritage tree, a misdemeanor that carried up to a year in jail and $25,000 in fines. Brad pleaded no contest to avoid a trial and was sentenced to 6 months of weekends in county jail, 200 hours of community service, and a $10,000 fine. He also had to pay $5,000 to the city's tree replanting fund. But the real nuclear option was the foreclosure. After 90 days of Brad being unable to pay the judgment, Patricia petitioned the court to force the sale of his house to satisfy the debt. The judge approved. Brad's house was was going to be foreclosed and sold at auction, with the proceeds going toward the judgment. I'll never forget the day the foreclosure notice was posted on Brad's door. I was watering my lawn in the empty space where my tree used to provide shade when the sheriff's deputy walked up and taped the official notice to Brad's front door. Brad came out a few minutes later, read it, and just collapsed onto his porch steps. He sat there for over an hour, head in his hands, completely broken. Small, vindictive part of me felt satisfied, but mostly I just felt tired. The house was auctioned 3 months later. It sold for $380,000, which was about $50,000 less than market value because of the forced sale. After paying off Brad's mortgage, $320,000, and the judgment to me, $330,000, which the full sale price didn't even cover, Brad was left with nothing. Actually, worse than nothing. He still owed me $270,000 that couldn't be recovered from the house sale. Patricia filed for wage garnishment, which meant that 25% of Brad's future earnings would go directly to paying off the remaining debt. At his current income level as a struggling real estate agent, it would take him approximately 15 years to pay it all off. And that was assuming he could even keep working. His real estate license was under review by the state board after his criminal conviction, and there was a good chance he'd lose it. Brad moved out of the neighborhood in December, about 8 months after he'd cut down my tree. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that he was renting a studio apartment across town and working part-time at a hardware store while trying to rebuild his real estate career. His divorce from Karen was finalized, and she'd gotten most of their remaining assets, which wasn't much. His BMW had been repossessed. His expensive watches had been sold. One destroyed tree had completely ruined his life. It's been a year now since Brad cut down my English oak. The empty space in my yard still hurts to look at, though I've planted a young oak sapling in its place. It'll take 100 years to grow to the size of the tree I lost, which means I'll never see it reach that glory. But maybe my grandkids will. I used some of the judgment money I received to install a beautiful memorial plaque near the new sapling. It reads, "In memory of the English oak, 1892 to 2024. 130 years of beauty, destroyed in minutes by arrogance." People in the neighborhood still talk about the Great Tree War, as they've come to call it. I've become something of a local legend, the guy who turned a tree dispute into a foreclosure. Several neighbors have thanked me for standing up to Brad, sharing their own stories of his entitled behavior over the years. Apparently, I wasn't the only one he'd victimized. I was just the first one to fight back hard enough to make it stick. Dorothy, the elderly neighbor Brad had tried to pressure into selling, invited me over for tea last month. She told me that she'd been terrified of Brad's intimidation tactics and hadn't known what to do. Seeing me take him down legally had given her closure. "You did what all of us wanted to do, but were too afraid to try," she said. "Thank you for that." As for Brad, I haven't seen him since he moved out. I heard he's working on rebuilding his life, but with a felony record. Misdemeanor was elevated after he violated his community service terms, wage garnishment for the next decade, and a demolished reputation in the real estate community. His prospects are grim. Some people might say I went too far, that I destroyed his life over a tree. But here's the thing, I didn't destroy his life. He destroyed his own life the moment he decided that his petty annoyance with falling leaves was more important than respecting the law, respecting his neighbor's property, and respecting a living piece of history that had stood for 130 years. I gave him multiple chances to be reasonable. I explained the legal protections. I said no clearly and firmly. He could have accepted any of those off-ramps. Instead, he chose arrogance. He chose to take a chainsaw to something irreplaceable, laughing while he did it, convinced that he was above consequences. He learned the hard way that consequences are real, and tree law is no joke. Would I do anything differently if I could go back? Honestly, no. I would have loved to save my tree, but once Brad made that first cut, the die was cast. The only question was whether I would let him get away with it or whether I would demand full accountability. I chose accountability, and I'd make that choice again. The new oak sapling is about 4 feet tall now. I water it every day, fertilize it according to the arborist's recommendations, and protect it like it's made of gold. In a way, it represents something more than just a replacement tree. It represents the idea that actions have consequences, that justice, even slow, grinding legal justice, still exists, and that sometimes standing up for what's right means burning down the person who wronged you. Brad cut down my $80,000 century-old tree. My lawyer turned it into foreclosure, wage garnishment, criminal conviction, and complete financial ruin. That's not revenge. That's just math. Tree law is undefeated.